I'm Kate Winkler Dawson.
And I'm Paul Holes.
This is Buried Bones.
Hey, Kate, how's it going?
It's going really well. I want to give some big props to one of our listeners. Well, I'll give props to all of our listeners, but one in particular who I feel like knows me so well. So she emailed me probably a couple of months ago and said, hey, I have something that I just want to send to you. I found it and I think you might like it. And since it's small, and I said, I can take care of the postage or whatever. And she just was really sweet. She sent it to me. And since it's small, it was easy to get to me. So it is a book that I feel like comes close to the rareness of what's the name of your medical book that you pulled out on the very first episode where you looked up, maybe it was chloroform. I can't remember what, mercury, I think.
That's it. Yeah, this is The Essentials of Forensic Medicine.
And that's from when?
1892.
And where did you get that? I couldn't remember where you told me you got that from.
Yeah, believe it or not, this was a hand-me-down from my dad. He kind of collected books, and I think he just was in a bookstore at some point in the past and bought it. And then when I saw it after getting into forensics, it was like, oh, this is a really, cool book where you have, and I don't want to open up too much, but you have the, hand-drawn diagrams in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a really cool book.
So this listener, her name's Jody, sent it to me, and this is a book that's called The People's Common Sense Medical Advisor. Right, here it is, and it's falling apart a little bit, which means, it's a great book. People have used it a lot.
Right.
It's from 1909, and she was really sweet. So, sending me this, and she, inscribed it, happy sleuthing, best regards, Jody, which was really nice. Cool. But I was flipping through here, and like with your book, this has a lot of really interesting pictures, anatomy of a knee joint. It gets really specific. It has testimony from different patients because this book was written by a doctor. This is the Invalids Hotel and Surgical Institute of Buffalo, New York, a remedial home established by R.V. Pierce and located in one of the healthiest cities in the United States. This was a book that was used by, I'm sure physicians, but also a book that people probably would have kept at home and used as a medical reference. And, I remember having not these books, obviously, but books like that at friends' houses and at our house, just sort of like, oh my gosh, I have something hurting in my knee pre-internet, which I was pre-internet, so were you, where you think, where am I going to get medical advice? And it was books like this, where you pick up a book and it's not going to be perfect, but it shows you a diagram and it kind of will do what WebMD does for me now, or my real doctor.
Yeah. In fact, on my other bookshelf, I have the Merck manual.
Oh.
So get all the information on all these drugs. It's thick. It's a small book. It's like maybe, I don't know, 6 by 8 inches, but it's about 3.5 to 4 inches thick. And so if there's any questions that back in the day I had about any drug substances, I'd go to the Merck manual.
Well, this goes along with this. We had another listener email me, and this is what she said. So we talked, and I can't remember what story it was. Oh, you know what, Paul? This was for Wicked Words. So she emailed me and mentioned that there was a guest who said that leeches are no longer used in medicine because doctors found out they were harmful rather than helpful. So before you comment on this, let me tell you, she says her mom had leeches used after her surgery just a couple of years ago. She said, I had a lot of questions. I said, what's going on with the doctor? And the doctor said that the leeches have an anticoagulant in their saliva and can be used to increase the blood flow around a surgical wound to promote the healing. And the surgery was for the removal of a cancerous tumor in her breast. Because I said, I'm going to talk to Paul about this. and I said, can I have more context? So that's what she said, that she said, from what I understood, the effects of the radiation made it difficult for the skin to heal itself. And that's how they used leeches. So is this, what? what do you think?
I know I've seen that leeches had been used. I couldn't tell you why they had been used in the medical sense. What you just read, that generally makes sense to me. I've also read, and this is, where, it gets a little, I don't know if you want to call it descriptive. I'll try not to be too descriptive, but in essence, when you have like necrotic tissue, where the tissue around a wound or something has died, that sterile maggots can be used, and they will go in and preferentially eat on the necrotic tissue. Now, having seen maggots in real life on dead bodies, it's like, no, that's not going to be done to me.
Wow. Amazing. I've never had to issue a trigger warning of don't eat your food right now because we're going to be talking about maggots feasting on dead flesh. But there you go. Wow. Well, I was shocked by the leeches in it. And it proves that sometimes there are things that carry over from hundreds of years ago that still work today.
Oh, yeah. No, for sure. Absolutely.
Well, this story is science-y. And I think it's the kind of story that you like because we'll be going down an interesting road that will feel familiar to you. So that's why I started with the science-y stuff, which is not always my thing. Even though I went to a science magnet school here in Austin, I still am befuddled by science. So I wanted to kind of prime you up for this.
Okay.
Okay, let's go ahead and set the scene. Okay, I'm going to issue a trigger warning. We are going to talk about sexual assault in this case, and it'll happen fairly quickly right at the beginning of the episode. We are in a very, very modern time for us, 1972. I mean, 2 years before I was born, I feel like it was just yesterday.
You're a young one. What are you talking about?
I mean, yeah, I'm happy to bring these sorts of stories because I think we were just recently in the mid 1800s. So I do have some photographs for you.
Great.
So this is August 23rd, 1972. And this is in an area of Washington called Bethel. It's about 20 miles north of Seattle. So right now, that area is pretty much suburbia, but back then it was pretty rural, lots of farms and wooded areas.
Okay.
So rather than introduce the victim, I'll introduce the scene of when the discovery happens. It's 5:45 p.m. and a couple is driving along a secluded dirt road surrounded by woods, and it's about a half a mile away from major roadways. The couple is driving into the woods to go target shooting. Great date. I've actually gone target shooting on a date night. That's weird. Maybe that's not weird. I don't know.
No, it's not weird.
No, it's not weird. The couple is heading into the woods to go target shooting, and they see a log that's blocking their path. The guy gets out of the car to see what it is and then to move it. And when he does, he sees a young woman lying in the road. She's alive, but barely. She's moving. She's groaning in pain. She appears to have a head injury, and she's dressed only in a bra and underwear and her shoes. And these are ankle boots, which will become important later on. One is tied, one is untied. And the shirt that she had been wearing is found nearby. It's a kind of a gray-blue color, and blue jeans are nearby. So they rush her to the hospital. She dies from her injury. And this injury is a gunshot wound from a small caliber bullet right above her right ear. And the time that the story happens, we don't name the couple because it was an 18-year-old woman and a 33-year-old man who were trying to keep their relationship secret. And so, eventually, this does come out, and they don't have anything to do with the case. It was just interesting that their identity was being protected. Okay, so that's where we are so far. A young woman who turns out to be 20, found in the roadway in a wooded area, an isolated spot in Washington State, 1972. And it sounds like she has a gunshot wound from a small caliber bullet right above her right ear.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I think we're leading to this looks like this is a potential sexual assault also.
Yeah. Is this an off-road location? Or is this a paved road? This log that's laying across the road. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of keying on that right now. As could the presence of that log, which sounds like it's a tree that's fallen, does that give us some temporal aspect on when people had access to freely pass through that road versus not? So that's one of the things that I'm kind of keying in on, just from understanding the crime scene a little bit better.
Yeah.
Her location behind the log, her state of duress, which is, it's interesting, where she's got her bra and underwear on, but also wearing her ankle boots. And with the ankle boots, I wonder, could her jeans have been taken off of her, or could she have taken those jeans off over the ankle boots? Probably not, is my guess. So does she partially redress if there was sexual assault? And was she completely nude at the time of the sexual assault? That's another question. But does she partially redress, gets her underwear on, gets her bra on, and then recognizes that she barefoot out in the woods, that's not going to work, and she's able to put her boots back on in order to try to move. And she's doing this with a gunshot to the head, and the location of the gunshot, behind the right ear or by the right ear, that's sounds like almost like an execution type of gunshot. Small caliber, and small caliber can mean a lot. Is it a 22? Is it a 25? Is it a 32? Is it a 380? And is there any information as to the distance of that gunshot wound? Is there any gunpowder around the entry wound? Is there stippling to any of the skin, if any of the exposed skin is there? So, but right now, it's the location of her shirt and blue jeans would suggest a location to where either the offender assaulted her and shot her, or that's where she was pushed out of a vehicle or taken out of a vehicle, but she was still alive to where she could move into the street. So, okay, I've got a pretty good sense of what's going on so far.
Good. Lucky for us, we do have an autopsy that gives us a lot more information. There are still clues that need to be gathered just from the scene. And of course, we still haven't identified her yet, but we will right now. So she is found by this couple at 5:45 p.m. About 11 o'clock. Some distressed parents call the police because their daughter, Jody, has not returned home. So this is about 5 hours later or so. Their names are Rosemary and John Loomis. Jody is 20. She is our victim, Jody Loomis. And a detective comes to their house to tell them the news that they believe that this is Jody. And she died shortly after arriving to the hospital, and the Loomises go and they identify her. So it's positive that this is their daughter. So there's stuff about Jody that actually will be kind of important. And then, of course, there's the autopsy and things that they discover at the scene after the autopsy, or maybe even during. And then there's the timeline of what her parents said happened. So there's a lot happening, a lot of information. What do you want to tackle first?
Well, with the information, this is unusual for you to be able to provide me with a lot of the information that I'm used to working with.
Jerks.
I'm excited. So I'm going to, start with my process. I want to know, first I start with an autopsy. I want to know what happened to the victim, what caused her death, and what other types of injuries are present. And we'll kind of intertwine that information with what I know about the crime scene, and then we can go from there. Okay,
here we go. Autopsy is conducted the next day. The medical examiner recovers fragments from, here's the gun, a .22 caliber bullet, finding that she was killed by that gunshot wound. Tell me about a .22 as far as, I know any gun can be deadly, but why would someone use that gun? Is it easy to conceal, or is this for picking off animals, or what?
Oh, well, there's so many reasons to choose a .22. First, it could be just this is the gun that the offender had access to. There is no other reason outside, I've got a gun, whether it be a legally purchased gun or something illegally obtained. I mean, that's just what the offender had. There may not have been a purposeful decision to use a .22. Now, a .22 at close range absolutely can be fatal. I've had homicides with .22 caliber guns, whether it be gunshot wounds to the head. I've had homicides where somebody's been shot in the torso with a .22. There's textbook examples of, .22s going into the femoral artery and then the bullet actually traversing, and causing kind of like an embolism. So, it is a fatal weapon. However, it is also not a very powerful weapon. And right now, I'm assuming it's a handgun, but you can have rifles that shoot .22. And typically those may be a little bit more powerful rounds. Why a .22 may be chosen by the offender, they can be smaller weapons, particularly if they're designed to be very compact. They can be much smaller than, let's say, your 9mm compact weapens. The .22s could potentially have less report. They're a little bit quieter, though it's still a loud sound when they are shot. But you do see that you can silence a .22 and it can make it fairly quiet, but it's not like in the movies where it's like this, whisper, you still have you still have a noise that is discernible, but it's not going to be a very loud noise relative to, a larger caliber weapon or a more powerful weapon. And then, if you're really sophisticated, these .22 bullets, and it sounds like in this case, they can become very mangled. And if it's got a coating on it, the markings that the barrel of that .22 gun leave on the bullet itself can be very indistinct and make it hard, if not impossible, for a firearms examiner to do a comparison to link that bullet back to a gun. And, I'll one example I can give you is there's an old book out there, it's basically How to Become a Hitman. And it's part of this whole, anarchy cookbook, same publisher, and in it they talk about using a .22. And there's a reason, because of, the bullets, not marking very well, the being able to silence them. They're cheap guns. So I would say that I've never had a case in which I've had anything close to what I would say a professional hitman coming in and purposely using a .22. Right. I've got one case in my career, and it was actually after I retired, in which I went, this is a professional hit. Outside of that, I think the .22 being grabbed in this case, in all likelihood, is probably because that's what the offender had access to. But maybe you'll tell me different.
Well, and keep in mind, this is a wooded area, heavily wooded area, rural area, and there's probably hunting going on, summertime, it's early evening. So, a gunshot might not sound, growing up on a farm, when I heard a gunshot, I did not immediately think murder. I thought somebody's out there hunting illegally or legally, depending on the time of year.
Oh, sure. In that particular environment, a gunshot is not going to be as obvious and stand out like if you're in a quiet neighborhood. But unless this person went out to shoot squirrels or rabbits, they're not choosing a .22 to go hunting out there. If they're hunting deer or something, they've got a real hunting rifle with much larger caliber rounds.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit. There's not a lot left, honestly, Paul, of the autopsy. I don't think they thought there was a lot more to say here. So we know that the .22 killed her. They said there is evidence of a sexual assault. They weren't specific about it, but 72, I think they would have been able to identify it, right? The medical examiner recovered some samples of dirt and leaf mold from her buttocks, which to them meant that she had been totally undressed, at least, there and laying on the ground. And that's pretty much it as far as the medical things go.
So they see signs of sexual assault.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like, okay, you got to articulate what you're actually observing.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know I've gone on rants before because I hate it when they use the phrase "no signs of sexual assault" and then don't. It's like, well, you can have sexual assault and not see injuries, whether it be external injuries, whether it be internal injuries to the female anatomy. So in this particular case, what is evidence of sexual assault? And again, I'm going to avoid getting graphic, but did they observe some injuries? Then it's their duty to articulate what those injuries are. Are they observing fluid inside cavities? And did they, look at the microscope? Did they identify sperm? They need to articulate that at autopsy, or those samples are, from the fluids get sent to the lab, and then the lab ends up identifying what those fluids are.
They did do a rape kit, and they did keep a lot of evidence, which is going to be good for us later on, but they aren't specific about exactly what the signs are. You're right. But they do conclude that they're there. And moving past that, they go back to the scene. If you're good about moving past the medical stuff for now until we might get a little bit more information.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm good.
Okay, so let's go to the scene. So they actually are looking for the gun or more bullets. They use a metal detector. They can't find any other bullets or traces of the murder weapon, so they never find the gun. They find a dime near her body, and Jodi's parents said she always carried a dime. Man, I haven't even thought about this for a long time, for the payphone in case there was an emergency. Yeah. Absolutely. So they found this dime. They find blood on the ground and leaves, it's strewn about in the area. And there's a little clip that Jodi used to clip her pants away from the bike chain. So now we come up with the bike chain, and I'll tell you about that in a second. So Jodi, let's get into a little bit more about Jodi so that I can explain the bike. She was a nurse's aide, 20 years old, as I told you. She was living with her parents. She went to community college. She wanted to be a nurse. She was engaged, though there wasn't a date set. And ultimately, I'll just say that the police rule this guy out, the fiance. And I can say he's ruled out, knowing what happens in this case. But so that part of the inner circle, the police eliminated pretty quickly. I think he had an alibi and, all of that. She was an avid equestrian. And so why don't you just pull up the photos that I sent you and just go to photo number 1. Don't go any further.
Yeah. So, this is a photo. This is Jodi in her equestrian or horse riding gear. I'm not sure exactly the proper term. She's standing and holding onto, basically, I'm assuming this is her horse that she would ride. It's just a typical picture of her and her horse. She's got the riding helmet on. She's got the jacket. This looks like she's getting ready to compete. This is not out taking the horse out into the woods. It looks like she's probably doing some sort of competition. It's tough to get an idea of her stature standing next to a horse. But she looks like she's average height, 5'4", 5'6", average build. And this is only a photo showing her from the waist up. But that's probably as much as I can see. She has glasses on that are shaded. I don't know if those are sunglasses or if they're prescription glasses that are tinted. But outside of that, I think that's about the only thing I can pull out of this photo.
Yeah. I mean, just a seemingly fit young woman, 20 years old, an athlete. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about the day that this happened. She loved to ride the horses, of course, and she had been riding her bike to a local stable to ride her horse when she was killed. So most of the time, Jodi would get a ride to the stable, but today she wanted to ride her bike.
Okay.
So she sets out a lot later than she intended to because she had been waiting to ask her younger sister if she could borrow her boots. Younger sister doesn't come home and it's going to get dark soon. So Jodi just grabs the boots that we end up finding at the woods, and she hits the road around 4 o'clock. So the last time that her parents see her is 4 p.m. The couple discovers her an hour and 45 minutes later. So here's one of the keys. Jody's parents said she took this more remote route to the stable because she wanted to stay off these major roads where there's a lot of traffic. So she didn't take her normal route. So I wanted you to take a look at the photo that I sent you. That is Jody on a bike. And this is clearly not the road where she was found because it's not dirt or, it doesn't look like there are trees that are going to fall over or anything. I think this would have been a major problem if a tree had fallen over because you can see a car in the distance.
Yeah. This is it's a 2-lane road. You can see it's separated by a solid yellow line. And, it's got a very slight curve along this section, but there is a lot of visibility. I think, I can see maybe out to a half a mile, before the road curves out of sight. Both sides of the road appear to be, heavily forested, though the location where Jody is at with her bike in this photograph, it appears that it's mostly tall grasses and weeds. I can see mailboxes and driveways at several points along this road that indicate it's it's kind of got a residential aspect to it, but is rural. It looks like your typical rural road, very narrow for a bicyclist. There isn't a dedicated bike lane like you often see today. And, if this is a road that Jody took because it was less traveled, I can completely understand that. When I would go biking out in California, I would do the same thing. On these narrow roads that don't have a good shoulder, and the big trucks start passing you at high speeds, it can be quite scary. So this here, though, if she's on this road or a similar road, to get to the horse stables, the day that she went missing, if it's not routine, that's kind of what I was initially wondering. If it was a routine practice of hers, then I could see where an offender could lie in wait. But if it's not routine, and we know nothing about who the offender is, whether it's an associate or a stranger, but let's say it's a stranger, then that would tend to suggest that she was a victim of opportunity if she had been abducted from the roadway. And of course, the big question right now is, well, where was her bicycle found?
Well, I can tell you that. So when they are searching, they find the bicycle, white bicycle, about 180 feet from where she was found. It looks like it had been thrown into a ravine. Useless to me, 180 feet. I can never figure out what that means. Is that a long way away? It's hard for me to ever know. I can figure out, I'll tell you what, I told my students this the other day, I can figure out a quarter of a mile because I can huff and puff my way through a quarter of a mile on a track that I used to run. But that's it. I don't have any other context other than that.
Well, I go back to playing football, so as you know, a football field is 100 yards or 300 feet long. So half a football field is 150 feet, tack 30 feet on top of that, and you've got your 180 feet. Okay.
So they've got the bicycle, and what they're now looking at is there is apparently a vehicle in the area that people had spotted. So now this is big news. Young woman who has been found dead. On August 26th, so this is 3 days after she is killed, police say they're looking for a vehicle that witnesses saw in the vicinity of the dirt road. They don't release any details about the vehicle, but they're just, telling reporters that they're looking for a vehicle. I'm not quite sure what the point of that is, because I know it's a little odd.
It's a little nondescript.
It is nondescript. So 2 days after that, on August 28th, they say they're looking for 2 vehicles that were seen in the area where Jody was found, but they don't give any description of the vehicles. Finally, the next day, the police say they're looking for something specific, a 1966 steel blue Chevrolet station wagon. 66, so this is 72. So, it's not an old car, steel blue Chevrolet station wagon. So I think I put this point in because I wanted you to understand that this is I don't know who they've called in at this point. As far as, are there state police involved, or is there, a major city involved? It doesn't sound like it to me so far. It sounds like they're kind of already making mistakes here.
Well, and sort of the nondescript aspect of a vehicle, there may have been a reasoning behind it, and maybe not. But if they had reasoning, my thought is that they could say this particular location, this day, this time, we saw vehicles. Mm-hmm. And so now people are thinking, oh, I was at that location. Oh, I remember seeing this type of vehicle. Versus putting out there a description or even a make and model of vehicle. And now they have people calling in saying, well, I was there and yeah, I saw that vehicle. Mm-hmm. And so in some ways, it's enhancing the veracity of the description of the vehicle from the witnesses because they're not being fed the information up front. So that kind of makes sense to me in that context. And then to get 1966 steel blue Chevy station wagon. Mm-hmm. That's pretty specific. And absent, you don't have surveillance video, back in 1972, to get that specific, I start thinking, okay, a witness came forward and you have a witness who knows his or her cars and is going, I was there and I saw this particular make and model of vehicle.
Well, I think this investigation gets more and more confusing. Now we're getting to this muddled timeline. So tell me what you think about the timeline. So you remember her parents said she walked out the door at 4:00. Her body was found at 5:45. So her bike ride from her house to the stable is about 40 minutes total. Where Jody was found on Penny Creek Road is about 20 minutes from her house, so halfway through, going along the route that she took. She was seen by witnesses riding her bike at 5:00, not far from where she was found at 5:45. But that was an hour after she left home. Now, I think one of the things you'll probably say is witnesses don't get their times right sometimes.
Right.
If the spot where she was left is 20 minutes from her house, what happened to that whole hour? And let me give you one more piece of information. So, of course, police want to know, she encounters somebody. The last person who they believe saw Jody alive, besides the killer, had been working in a farm stand. It was a girl. They don't say how old. She had been working at a farm stand along the route that Jody was riding. She said that she saw Jody approach the turn at the road, the dirt road where she was found, that she stopped. She looked into the woods. The girl interpreted the look on her face as kind of confused, but not alarmed. I don't know if the girl didn't see whether she went into the woods or not, but this was a route that she would normally not take because remember, she usually got a ride, but she would have known. She would have known how to do this, so it wouldn't have been completely out of the ordinary. So that lost hour is what's, I think, confusing police at this point.
Well, I'm not sure there's a lost hour. So she leaves at 4:00.
Right.
She was seen riding her bike at 5:00. Was that this girl who saw her kind of stop and look down the dirt road?
No, several different witnesses.
Different witnesses?
Not far from where she was eventually found.
If it's just a 40-minute bike ride to the stables from her parents' house, 20 minutes past the time that she should have gotten to the stables, she's still seen riding her bike along that road. Mm-hmm. Does she stop and talk to somebody? Is there a neighbor, and so she's just chatting with somebody who happened to be passing her on the road, completely innocent type of just everyday type of interaction that could have delayed her of getting to the stables. And as far as I know, and maybe you tell me otherwise, she doesn't have to be at the stables at a particular time. It's not like she's got a coach that's going to be waiting for her to give her a lesson at 6:00 or whatever. So, she's not necessarily going to abide by some, in my mind, this is how I'm kind of thinking out loud. She's not going to think, I have to get to the stables by a certain time. And so if she does stop to talk to a friend or a neighbor or whatever, you can see where, she's not in a rush to get moving again. it's not her routine route to get to the horse stables, so I wouldn't be surprised given the nondescript nature of that landscape where maybe she's stopping and going, is this the dirt road or is it the next one down? And that's what this girl saw her do. Just speculating in my mind.
Yeah.
But she's last seen riding at 5:00 by multiple witnesses. And then her body is found at 5:45. Well, we don't know how long her body's been out there. Was it out there just for 5 minutes? Was it out there for 40 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
You know, was she literally abducted and killed, 5 minutes after she was last seen riding her bike?
Mm-hmm.
Now, her body is found only a 20-minute drive away from the parents' house.
Mm-hmm.
Where she's seen by these witnesses, is she further away from the parents' house on the map?
It says going along the route, not far from where she was found. So I don't think it's she went somewhere and then backtracked. I think it was somewhere along this, 0 to 20 minutes marker. So I don't think it's that she's coming the opposite direction or anything. I think it is along the route.
Well, I'm more thinking of, this is where I'd want to map these points out. Mm-hmm. But let's say she gets mostly to the stables and then she encounters the offender or offenders that abduct her. Mm-hmm. Do they take her back a way that actually gets her closer to her parents' house, but they go into a more secluded area down this dirt road? So that's kind of what I would be judging is how far did she actually get on her bike? And the location of her bike is, on this map is significant. And then the location of her body is significant. Why do the offenders take her to that particular location?
Okay. And I had just thought, maybe she popped her chain. And it took forever for her to get it back on. I mean, who knows?
Absolutely.
And, you don't have a cell phone. She has no choice. She has to fix the bike or whatever. And so mm-hmm. I could see that easily. I was walking by a little kid who had popped their chain and just looked completely like, what do I do? What do I do? And I said, well, let's go get your parents and find out. I don't know how to put on a chain.
Yeah. But also this can be answered. Did she have grease on her hands?
Yeah. Yeah. Not that I saw on the autopsy, but you're right. Okay, so we've talked about her fiance. Jim is totally cleared at this point. He is actually a janitor at the hospital where she had been taken, but he was at work at the time. He was cleared, and like I said, we know he's cleared here. So the police in September, so this is a month after she's found, they announced that they're now looking for 2 suspects. They had something about 2 cars before, but they were not very specific except for the description of 1 car. They know their identities. They believe that both of them have left the state. They don't give any details about the 2 suspects. And they do say that the information about a vehicle led them to these suspects. But we don't know if this is the Chevrolet that they're talking about. My impression, and you could tell me I'm wrong here, was that the police were just trying to say freaking anything, to say we're doing something, but they don't have enough confidence in anything to be able to give specific information. I mean, 2 suspects, we can't say who they are, but they're not in the state anymore, so nobody's in danger. Maybe 2 cars, but that's how we found them, but we can't tell you about the car. I mean, they're really not saying anything except we are still working on this case. But you think I'm wrong?
No, there's no reason for them to be updating the public in terms of where they are at in their investigation. Part of it is that even though it's nondescript, just the fact that they're saying based off of vehicle information and there's 2 suspects, the actual suspects may be going, oh, they're on to us. Now it makes it that much harder for law enforcement to drill down. You don't want to be tipping your hand, when you don't need to. You can just go to a press conference and give generic updates. We are continuing to take leads. We have some leads that we are following. We will keep you guys abreast to the point that we can without compromising the investigation.
Well, none of this works because the case goes cold.
Okay.
There is nothing new for decades, but then there is something new. Over the years, there's a lot of speculation about Ted Bundy, who is from this area. And they wonder if this could have been one of his earliest killings. But ultimately, and this is where I need you to weigh in, law enforcement says, we don't think so because the MO is so different from Bundy's typical MO. So what do you think about that?
This is a common misperception about serial predators, is that they're cookie cutter. Every single time they commit a crime, they commit it the same way. I've worked too many cases and seen the variance firsthand of what the same offender does, whether it be victim type, whether it be how the victim is interacted with, the initial interaction. Is it an abduction, or is it like Ted Bundy, sweet talking, a college co-ed, is it, picking up a sex worker on the stroll? There are so many offenders that I've looked at where the variance in what they do is stunning, where you think it's different individuals committing the crimes. Now, there are behaviors that these serial predators tend to exhibit that will differentiate their crimes. And these are behaviors that are driven by the offender's inner fantasies. But the act of committing the crime, their MO, what it takes to commit the crime, will vary based on the circumstances of the case. You can have a Ted Bundy do a very planned type of crime. You can have a Ted Bundy do a spontaneous victim of opportunity, so the fact that Ted Bundy is in this area has to be at least acknowledged. However, just because he is in the area, this notorious and very prolific serial killer, does not mean he's involved. But you cannot say, well, this MO is different, so it's not him.
Yeah. This is not followed up on at all, Bundy. But, regardless, this is a case that just goes cold, cold, cold. Now, there was some comfort with her parents in that, knowing that they had gathered, all of this. They had her underwear, they had vaginal swabs from the original rape kit. They had all of her clothes. So we are now going to flash forward into the 90s, 20 years later. And this is a little bit of a evolution of what happens with law enforcement in this area at the time. The sheriff's office in Snohomish County had the funding and the manpower to get a major crimes unit up and going. When they get this established in the 90s, they start pulling out cold cases. They get to Jody's case, which was a notorious case, and they realized there are no slides made from any of the potential DNA evidence. So they cannot find her underwear anymore. They cannot find the vaginal swabs from the original rape kit anymore. The only thing they have are clothes at this point. So they send everything off, and it goes to the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab. But it's another decade before anything can be made of the little evidence that they were able to send off. I understand when things disappear, but my goodness, that's the most important stuff they had in this case, vaginal swabs in her underwear.
Yeah. And I've been involved in multiple cases from this era where that type of critical evidence has either been lost or was purposefully destroyed, where, a pathologist literally, once he identified, there's sperm on, off of the vaginal swab is thrown away. Because back in the 1970s, that's all they could do is identify, there's the existence of semen. Poor practice. Absolutely. Very frustrating when you go, I could have solved the case if that had just been kept. When they say that they couldn't find these items, and it's very possible, those items are absolutely gone. But these items over decades have a tendency to find places where they hide themselves, so to speak. We've had success, and most notably a Golden State Killer, where an entire rape kit nobody knew about was actually within the coroner's own storage, because the pathologist, out of practice back in 1980, collected 2 rape kits at Autopsy. One he gave to law enforcement, the other he kept the coroner's. So these vaginal swabs, is there any paper trail going from the coroner's office to the investigating agency? Is there any paper trail showing that these swabs were ever sent out to, let's say, Washington State Patrol Crime Lab? What does their paperwork say? We found evidence when my sheriff's office, when we did a complete inventory of hundreds of thousands of items contained within this property warehouse, all of a sudden, evidence from many old cases was found. Some of it had just been put into the wrong box. So this is where, on a major case like this, when I talk to investigators and they say, well, property's saying they can't find the evidence. And then it's like, you need to go back there and search with your property people. And you need to figure out, is it just in a wrong box? Is it in a wrong paper bag that's in a wrong box? That stuff really happens. Then you have property people over time, for whatever reason, they just destroy homicide evidence. And you just go, what? How does this happen? And it's just, you got somebody who's processing hundreds, if not thousands of items a week for destruction purposes, and doesn't catch, this actually is related to a homicide, and just goes through the destruction process. And what you hope is that there's actually documentation showing, okay, well, that item is gone.
Yeah. Right.
I don't need to search the property room now. I know that item's gone because I've got the destruction receipt.
Well, this is quite a case. We get to 2008. And there's a renewed push to solve cases in this county. The investigators pull out the old evidence and have it analyzed for possible sources of DNA. They had sent this off to the crime lab. It was unclear, what they were going to be able to do at that point in the early 90s. So the crime lab then looks for possible sources of DNA. And they look at those boots that Jody had borrowed from her sister. And on one of the boots, a researcher at the State Patrol Crime Lab finds a semen stain. So he's able to construct a partial DNA profile. Wow. So, we're at a good point. They upload it to Cotus, nothing. And they start getting DNA samples from all the men who were named in the original case file. I'm presuming the ones that they were not telling us about. They get samples from the family members of the men, nothing. So this case goes cold for another 9 years.
Can I ask a question? I mean, you may not have the answer. These were her sister's boots?
Right.
How old was her sister? Older sister, younger sister?
Younger, 12.
She's 12 at the time?
Mm-hmm.
Because part of the process, after you find that you have semen on the sister's boots, is interviewing the sister. And, did you have any sexual relations with a boy, prior to your sister borrowing your boots? Now, with the sister being 12, it's very unlikely, but that's something that's, you probably still need to conduct that type of interview, particularly in 2008, and you don't get a Cotus hit. Now there's a lot of man hours, a lot of effort, tracking down DNA samples from all these various suspects. If it turns out, well, no, that's just a consensual sample, that was deposited, during some, fling that the sister had. But the fact that she's 12, it's unlikely.
Yeah. Yeah, and I actually had wondered how long a semen stain would be there on a boot in particular. If it is, let's say it is the sister, which is so unlikely, but it was, she said, yeah, I have a boyfriend, but, we haven't had sex for 6 months or something. Tromping through mud. It's Washington State. Water. I can show you a picture of the boot sooner rather than later if you want. Would the semen stain from 6 months earlier maybe still be there, or is it even less likely because of all of the environmental elements that the sister would have been in during this time?
You just stated the variables. The semen stains can exist on clothing, can exist on, let's say, these types of boots for decades and still be viable using modern DNA technology. Or environmental insults could potentially damage that semen stain very rapidly. So it all depends, but right now in this investigation in 2008, I mean, this is at least exciting. The hope is that the semen is from the offender. This is, something that either it was a drip after he sexually assaulted and ejaculated internally in Jodi, or you have an external ejaculation. That's all part of assessing, the crime scene. But I'm excited at this point. In 2008, it's like, okay, they have biological evidence. You need to identify who this male is.
It takes another 9 years. So in 2017, the prosecutor in that county, who's a guy named Craig Matheson, he learns about the genetic genealogy because it was the year before. Is that right? Or was it 2017 when Golden State Killer? Because they mention it specifically in this case.
Well, we didn't announce Golden State Killer arrest until April of 2018.
Okay. So in 2017, he finds out about genetic genealogy being used somehow, some way. He sends the sample to Parabon Nanolabs. Have you dealt with Parabon before?
Yes, I know Parabon well.
Okay. So Parabon says they can use it to identify a pool of relatives. We know how this goes. And then they find family members that are related to the person whose DNA profile they have. In 2018, a genealogist builds a family tree and identifies a group of 7 siblings who were born in Edmonds, Washington. 6 of the 7 are men. 1 is a very likely match for the profile. So of these guys, 6 brothers have died. Of those 6 brothers, some have died, but one of the men who are still living is a guy named Terrence Miller, and he is the guy. This is 7 years ago. He's in his mid-70s. Do you want to know about him, or what more do you want? I mean, there's a long list of stuff about him.
I most certainly can extrapolate exactly how they drilled down onto Terrence Miller, and then ultimately they got a direct sample from him and did your classic court-approved STR analysis. That's, all the law enforcement databases Cotus is built upon. And that direct comparison confirmed that Terrence Miller is the semen donor on Jodi's boot.
Sort of. So they decide to get the sample surreptitiously. So I know we've talked about that. I mean, what they end up doing is they have all this information about him. He does have a record that's connected to sex offenses, including in his own family. They go in August of 2018, they follow him to a casino where he drinks from a coffee cup. He throws it away. And they say within 30 seconds, they grab the coffee cup and they send it to the crime lab. And there's a match. So why would they have done this surreptitiously and not gone through the warrants and everything else?
This is the classic way on how to approach an investigation. So with this type of suspect, and it takes time to do DNA, even when it's rushed. It can take a day or several days. If they approach him, let's say they go and get a search warrant, and now they approach him and compel him to provide a DNA sample. Unless they have lawful reason to detain him for some reason, and there's some aspects where this you can detain if he's got other crimes. In essence, he's out of custody. Is he a flight risk? Is he going to disappear on you? It can compromise the investigation while you're waiting for DNA analysis. Is he destroying physical evidence? Let's say the gun, where he goes, oh shit, I still have the murder weapon. And that's gone. So you're better off in this type of situation of getting that surreptitious sample. And sounds like it was a match. So Terrence Miller, it's his semen on these boots. Now you get the search warrant. And that search warrant isn't just for his DNA. That search warrant is looking for all the various types of evidence possibly related to Jodi's homicide. And now you can confront him and interview him, or doesn't have the time, he hasn't had the time to sit there and come up with a very sophisticated lie. You catch him cold. So this is always, well, I shouldn't say always, but this is usually how these types of cold cases in which genealogy has been done occur. And you never make an arrest on genealogy. Genealogy just points you. And like in this instance, it pointed to a family that had 6 men. And now they have to evaluate those 6 men as to which one is possibly Jody's offender. But you don't make an arrest when you go, oh, well, Terrence looks like the likely one because of his criminal history. You always get that direct sample. You never arrest based off of genealogy. It is strictly an investigative tool, an investigative lead.
Well, talking about, ambushing him and getting him before he has a chance to do anything, after they get the results within a few days, in November of 2018, they have investigators in plain clothes. They go to he's in a ceramic shop. He owns a ceramic shop. And they show up. They see that he has printed out an article about another local arrest using familial DNA evidence. I mean, which is just, if that's not a foreshadow, I don't know. And of course, he's arrested. So it's, this happens sort of quickly, but then there's also, I still have to tell you about his background, sure. His rap sheet, essentially. Yeah.
Well, you use the term familial DNA, this article with familial DNA. Now, technically, that is a different process than genetic genealogy. That's where within Cotus, if you have, let's say, this Seaman DNA profile from Jody's boot, you ask the Cotus administrator of your state, in essence, okay, instead of looking for a one-to-one direct comparison, I got, is the man that deposited this semen on the boot in your database? You ask the Cotus administrator, is that man or any of his first-order paternal relatives in your database? You're looking for a brother, a son, or a father. So most notably, this is how the Grim Sleeper case down in Los Angeles was solved, is they ended up finding, I think, the son of the Grim Sleeper. But this is a tool that got some publicity, and most certainly offenders over time that, let's say, committed cases in the 1970s, when they are seeing the DNA technology advance, this is where their eyes are going, the eyes are big. This is an of I left my DNA. Now, if it's just Cotus, where it requires them to have committed a crime and they got sampled and put into Cotus, they can prevent themselves from being arrested. Don't go out and do anything stupid. Yeah. And therefore, you will never hit to that semen profile up in Cotus. But when it's genealogy, you can't stop your third cousins from putting their DNA into these genealogy databases. And now these types of offenders are really in a pickle, because they no longer have control as to whether or not law enforcement is going to get onto them based on the DNA evidence that they left behind 40, 50 years ago.
I thought about Cotus a little bit because he doesn't show up in Cotus, but let me tell you his background.
Sure.
He has a history of sex offenses that makes law enforcement want to check him first when they get this list of brothers. So his DNA wasn't in any of the databases initially. In the 60s, he was arrested for lewd conduct and for contributing to the delinquency of a minor. And in the 70s, he had been, it looks like he had offended against a family member and was given the opportunity to go to counseling. So when he did that, the charges were dismissed. He had been married 4 times, not a crime, but one of them, which was his first marriage, was to a 14-year-old who was pregnant at the time. And when he killed Jody, he had 3 kids from his previous marriages. He had a 3rd wife, which ended in a divorce. Here's a key thing, I had thought this is such a rural area, this must be a local. He lived 5 miles away from the spot where he murdered Jody and left her behind.
Yeah.
Let me tell you about the trial. So he's arrested in the spring of 2019. And he is charged, and the case goes to trial in the fall of 2020. Gosh, not long ago. The initial bail was set at $1 million, but his attorney negotiated this to be $750,000, and he's released on bond. And people testify, but after closing arguments, he gets to go home one last time while the jury deliberates because he's out on bond, and he takes his own life.
I could have predicted that.
On November 9th, 2022. And then, of course, the jury finds him guilty a few hours after that.
Is there any information as to, did he make any admissions when he was interviewed?
No, I haven't seen anything about that. I mean, I could do a quick check, but no admissions as far as I know. And where he got that money, so a bond is, how much would that be? Is that 10%? How much do you have to put off?
I think it's 10%. I'm not real familiar with that, but
75,000. I don't know.
That's why his attorney negotiated specifically down to 750,000 because he knew his client probably had sufficient funds in order to be able to do the bond.
Mm-hmm. So, all of this is no justice for Jody. And in a way, yes, because, we find out who the offender is. I don't know if her fiance ever had a cloud of suspicion, even though he had a really solid alibi. We've done those cases before, but this was not what the family wanted, surely, out of all of this.
Yeah, they got an answer. And this is hard. I can't speak, to how the family would feel about the circumstances of Terrence being let out and taking his own life while out of custody. I can assume they would be appalled at the fact that this guy that's being accused of murdering and sexually assaulting and murdering their 20-year-old daughter is even being allowed to be out of custody while he's going through trial.
Yeah.
So I think the Terrence Miller's age probably was a factor that the judge considered. He's unlikely to be a flight risk, which I don't know. Is this guy wheelchair bound?
No. He's 78 too.
So I'm surprised for this type of crime they reduced the amount down to something that he could afford to post. Yeah. So I think the family rightfully would be very, very upset about that. Now, whether or not, they may see him taking his own life as the easy way out. Mm-hmm. They'd want him to be, have to go through the conviction, have to go through, the impact statements, the family's confronting him about, the loss of their loved one and what that has done to the family. And then knowing that he would be in prison for the rest of his life. So, it is an unfortunate ending to this, but at the same time, law enforcement stayed on it. Mm-hmm. And it was fortunate that there was biological evidence on the boot.
Yeah. And there are answers. Thank goodness. One of the things that's unfortunate to me is certainly I wish that this had happened before the trial started. Her sister, who was 12 at the time, had to take the stand, identify the boots that her sister had borrowed from her. This was, I'm sure, traumatizing for the family even decades later. But, at the same time, there you are. You do have some answers. You do have a face. You're not looking over your shoulder. What if you're suspecting your neighbor? Mm-hmm. That's probably where I would have headed, is maybe a family member or maybe a neighbor or something. And knowing that this guy is out there, I'm shocked that he wasn't in Cotus, but I guess not.
Based off the criminal history that you provided, you have lewd and lascivious with a minor back in the 1960s. Sounds like he got a slap on the wrist for what sounds like sexual abuse of a family member, which I'm assuming is another child. Mm-hmm. That's a big mess up on the justice system right there. However, how old those crimes are, it really comes down to Washington's laws in terms of, does he qualify for cases that are that far back in time to be sampled and put into Cotus? Yeah, there's like in California, there was changes over time to where at a certain point you could retroactively, for these older cases, you could go back and now get samples from sex offenders that were convicted decades prior. But there's so many sex offenders that qualify to be sampled, and they've never been sampled, and they're just out in the public. And there's monies available for agencies to be able to, dedicate resources to go out and track those guys down and get their samples. But some agencies will never follow through with it.
Wow. Well, we don't often have these cold cases that we are able to follow up and say, this is what actually happened. So I'm grateful for that. I know you like talking about genetic genealogy and DNA and all of the advances. That's, what you work on all the time. So this was a case that I'm glad had closure, but to me, in some ways, an unsatisfying ending. Ultimately, I hate it when people go out on their own terms like that, but anyway, what I'm hoping is that we, next week we can have some cases where we see true to form justice. That's what I look for. I know I don't always give them to you, but I really try. We have a mixed bag when we were in the 1800s and the early 1900s. You just never know.
Sure. Well, every time I sit down to talk to you, I never know what you're going to give me.
That's the goal. Okay. I will see you for a very different case next week.
Sounds great. Take care, Kate.
You too.